The rain hit harder than it had in weeks. Cold, sharp drops pelted the streets of the city like 1,000 tiny needles, stinging the skin of anyone unlucky enough to be caught outside. A boy, no older than 15, huddled beneath a broken umbrella, his small frame trembling against the wind. His clothes were nothing more than rags, the hem of his pants soaked, his shoes long worn through. He wasn't even sure why he was still walking. What was there to keep him moving anyway? But then, through the dim glow of streetlights and the relentless downpour, he saw something that made his heart skip. It was a dog, lying on the wet pavement, its small body shivering. A mangy thing barely recognizable as a dog at all, with ribs so visible they seemed to tell a story of years without love. The dog's legs were twisted, misshapen, the hind ones useless. Crippled from birth. The kind of thing that should have been put down. The poor creature had been left behind by its mother, abandoned in a place where no one would have cared. The boy's steps faltered as he drew closer, and for a moment, he thought he would just keep walking. But something in the dog's eyes stopped him. It was as if the animal understood loneliness as deeply as he did. As if it was waiting for someone to save it. And something deep inside the boy snapped. He couldn't leave it. He bent down, his heart pounding in his chest, and scooped the small dog into his arms, ignoring the dampness that soaked through his worn jacket. "I'll take care of you," he whispered, though he had no idea how. It wasn't the first time he'd seen an abandoned animal. Not the first time he'd been surrounded by reminders of a life less lived. His own life had been one of survival. On the streets, without the protection of a family, without the comfort of a home. He had learned long ago how to hide from the cold, how to scrounge for food in places where no one would look, how to survive in a world that often forgot he existed. But taking in the dog was different. It wasn't just about survival. It was about hope. As he made his way through the alleyways, holding the dog close to his chest, the boy felt something stir within him. A strange sense of responsibility, an unfamiliar warmth. He knew the streets weren't kind, and he had nothing to offer this creature. The dog's broken body felt so fragile in his arms. The boy, too, felt fragile, but he was determined to protect it. By the time he found a quiet spot under a bridge, where the world was hidden away behind the shadows, the dog had curled up into a tiny ball, whimpering softly. The boy didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to help. But for the first time, he didn't feel completely alone. He had someone, something, to care for. And in that small moment, he began to believe that maybe, just maybe, life could be more than just getting by. The boy's life began to revolve around the dog. He found bits of food in the trash, scraps of bread or a half-eaten apple, enough to feed them both. His hands shook as he tried to wipe the rain from the dog's face, the animal's weak eyes looking up at him with a trust he didn't deserve. The days blurred together, and with every passing moment, the bond between them grew stronger. The boy called the dog Benny. He had no reason for the name, no special significance, but it felt right. A name for something he could protect. As the days turned into weeks, something miraculous began to happen. The dog, though still frail, began to show signs of improvement. Its legs, still twisted and weak, started to move a little, as if Benny was learning to trust his body again. The boy watched in awe, wondering if maybe this was the magic he'd been hoping for. Not in the dog, but in him. The dog had no reason to believe in him. It had been abandoned by the very one who was supposed to care for it. But it trusted him, regardless of what it had been through. There were days when the boy thought about running, about leaving everything behind. He still had no future. He still had no real home, no security. But he couldn't leave Benny behind. Not now. Not when the dog had started to fight for its own life. Life on the streets was brutal, and the boy's attempts to help Benny felt like a never-ending uphill battle. There were moments when the world seemed to weigh so heavily on his shoulders that he could barely breathe. The shelter was just a few blocks away, but he was terrified to go there. He knew the rules. No one would let him stay with a dog, not one that was broken and limp. Still, they made do. They had each other, and that was enough. But Benny's injuries were more serious than he could have imagined. The limp never quite went away, And no matter how much the boy tried, how much he prayed for a miracle, Benny remained frail, just barely hanging on. The boy had to make a choice to continue trying, knowing they both might never get what they needed, or to let go. The decision weighed on him like 1,000 tons of stone, but in his heart, he knew he couldn't abandon Benny the way he had been abandoned. He had to try, even if it meant failing. The turning point came one evening, when the boy had just about given up. Benny had stopped eating, and the rain poured relentlessly, as if the world itself was mourning. The boy sat next to him, cradling the small dog against his chest, whispering softly to him. He didn't know if Benny could understand him, but he had to say it for both their sakes. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't save you, but I'll never leave you." And that was when it happened. Benny's tail, which had been lifeless for so long, twitched. The boy's heart raced, and he leaned down, his breath catching in his throat. Benny lifted his head, weakly licking the boy's hand. It was the first time the dog had shown any real sign of life. The boy stared at him, wide-eyed, and for the first time in months, a smile crept across his face. They both had a chance. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Weeks passed, and Benny grew stronger. His once wobbly legs found some semblance of strength, and though he still limped, there was a light in his eyes that hadn't been there before. The boy, too, began to find his strength, not just in the dog, but in himself. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were living. The boy still had no home, no future, but he no longer cared. Together they had made it, and together they would keep going. As the sun dipped below the horizon one evening, casting a soft golden light over the city, the boy stood on the street corner, Benny by his side. They weren't alone anymore. They had each other, and for the first time, the world felt a little less cold. He bent down, stroking Benny's fur, and whispered into the quiet night, "We're not alone, not anymore." The dog wagged his tail, and the boy smiled. For all the pain, for all the heartbreak, they had each other. And that, in the end, was all they needed. It had been months since that cold, rainy night when the boy had first found Benny on the street. In that time, everything had changed, slowly, quietly, but surely. The boy had found himself standing in a new place, not physically, but emotionally. He was still on the streets, still struggling, but now there was hope, and that hope wasn't just for Benny anymore. It was for both of them. As winter gave way to spring, the harsh chill of the city seemed to lift, and the boy found himself waking up with a sense of purpose he hadn't known before. The days weren't easy, but they weren't impossible either. Benny's limp had grown less pronounced. He still couldn't run like he should, but he was getting stronger with each passing day. And the boy. He was stronger too, though he would never admit it out loud. There was an undeniable shift in him, like he had been forged in fire, but it wasn't the kind of strength that came from physical battles. No, it was something deeper. A quiet confidence that came from knowing that, no matter how hard the world tried to knock him down, he would keep getting back up. It was on a crisp afternoon, as the sun began its descent behind the city's skyline, that the boy's path crossed with something that would change their lives forever. He had been walking with Benny, as he often did, through the park near the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, just a patch of green in the middle of concrete and steel. But it was their little escape. Here, Benny could run, albeit slowly, and the boy could breathe without the constant weight of survival pressing on him. They were resting on a bench when a car pulled up beside them. The boy glanced up instinctively, his guard up. It wasn't often that anyone took interest in them. But then, a woman stepped out. She was dressed neatly, her face warm, but there was a quiet sadness in her eyes that made the boy pause. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said softly, glancing down at Benny. But I couldn't help but notice him. That dog. He's been through a lot, hasn't he? The boy tensed, his instinct to protect Benny kicking in. But something about the woman's voice was different. There was no pity, no judgment, only concern. Benny, who had once only responded to the familiar faces of the streets, seemed to trust her immediately. He raised his head, his tail giving a tentative wag. "He's been through more than anyone should," the boy replied, his voice low but steady. "But he's mine now." and I'm not letting him go." The woman smiled, as if she understood exactly what he meant. "I don't want to take him from you," she said, her voice gentle. "But I've been running an animal rescue for a few years now. We help dogs like Benny get back on their feet, literally. We have a vet on site, rehabilitation programs, everything. I know it's hard, but there's a place for him with us, if you ever want to give him that chance." The boy's chest tightened. The words she spoke were like a lifeline thrown to someone stranded in the middle of the ocean. But it wasn't just Benny that the boy was thinking of. It was him too. The idea of Benny being cared for, truly cared for, in a place where he could heal without the constant strain of survival. Maybe it was what the dog deserved. Maybe it was what he deserved. But even as the boy thought it over, a part of him fought against the idea. The streets had shaped him into someone who clung to what little he had, even if it wasn't much. And Benny, in some strange, inexplicable way, had become his anchor. The thought of letting go, even if it was for Benny's own good, was a terrifying one. The woman seemed to sense his hesitation and took a step back, as though to give him space. "It's okay. I'm not asking you to decide right now. Just know that there's an option out there for him if you want it. You've done more for him than most people would, but sometimes it's okay to let others help too." The boy stood there for a long moment, staring at Benny, who had now laid his head on the ground, his tired eyes looking up at him with a deep, unspoken trust. The dog had always been there for him, through the darkness of their shared life. Could he really let go of that? "I don't know if I'm ready," he murmured, his voice barely audible. The woman nodded, a knowing look in her eyes. "You don't have to be. Take your time. But just know that it's okay to accept help. For both of you." She handed him a small card, with the name of the rescue written on it, before getting back in her car and driving away, leaving the boy alone with his thoughts. Benny didn't stir, his breathing steady and calm, as though everything was right in the world. The boy sank back onto the bench, the weight of the card in his pocket feeling heavier than he expected. It was a long night for the boy, full of questions he couldn't answer. Could he really let Benny go to someone else? What did it mean for their bond, for their shared survival, if he chose to do so? And yet, deep down, the boy knew one thing for certain: Benny deserved more than this. He deserved more than the cold pavement and the half-hearted scraps of food. He deserved a chance to run without pain, to be loved and cared for in a way that the boy, with all his love and best intentions, couldn't provide. The following morning, after a night of restless tossing and turning, the boy stood at the edge of the park, Benny at his side. He watched the sun rise over the horizon, its soft light touching the world with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. He knew what he had to do. With one last look at Benny, he made the decision. He would take Benny to the rescue, not because he couldn't love him anymore, but because he loved him too much to keep him in a world where they both had to fight for every breath. He would give Benny the life he deserved, the life they both deserved. And as they walked together toward the rescue center, the boy felt a sense of peace settle over him. This wasn't goodbye. This was the beginning of something new, something that would allow them both to heal, to grow. Together, they had come so far. And now Benny would get the chance to run free. And the boy, he would find his own path, one where he didn't have to fight alone. The boy had never imagined that the world could be this quiet, this still. The mornings were different now. He woke up to the soft rustle of the wind, the sound of birds chirping in the distance. The streets outside his small apartment were still filled with noise. Cars honking, people shouting, the hurried footsteps of commuters. But inside, everything was calm. Everything felt as though it had found its place again. It had been months since he had left Benny at the rescue center, and life, though hard, had begun to feel a little less like survival and more like living. The boy had started to trust the routine. Getting up in the morning, making breakfast, taking a bus to work, then coming home, only to start all over again. But there was something inside him that had changed, something that wouldn't let him rest. The ache that had been in his chest for so long, the emptiness that had clung to him since his childhood, had started to fade. He was still lonely sometimes, still haunted by the scars of his past, but the memory of Benny, the dog he had rescued and then had to let go, kept him going. Benny was safe, and that was enough. But as the weeks passed, the boy found himself thinking more and more about his own future. Could he keep living like this? A part of him wondered if there was more for him, if there could be a life beyond the walls of his small apartment, beyond the streets he had walked so many times alone. It was the little things that began to change first. He started eating better, something that had never been a priority for him before. He began to make friends at work, small conversations at first, but enough to remind him that he was no longer invisible. And when he walked home at night, he didn't feel the same weight pressing on him. The streets didn't seem so suffocating anymore. But there was one thing, one question, that he couldn't shake: what had happened to Benny. Had he really found a family? Had he healed? The boy knew he had made the right choice, but the uncertainty lingered in the back of his mind, like a shadow he couldn't escape. Then, one crisp autumn evening, while he was walking home from work, something stopped him in his tracks. There, sitting at the edge of the park near his apartment, was a familiar face. It was a woman from the rescue center, the same woman who had taken Benny from him months ago. Her face was kind, but her expression was serious, as if she had something important to say. He approached slowly, unsure of what to expect. His heart raced in his chest, 1,000 thoughts running through his mind. "Hey," the woman greeted him, her voice soft but warm. "I hope you don't mind me waiting for you here. I wanted to talk to you about something." The boy's throat tightened, his stomach churning with the familiar feeling of dread. "Is it about Benny?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The woman smiled gently, nodding yes, she said. "It's about Benny." He felt his breath catch in his throat. For a moment, he couldn't speak, his mind frozen in place. "Is he okay?" he finally managed to ask, his voice shaky. "Benny's doing more than okay," the woman replied, her eyes shining with sincerity. "He's doing great. In fact, he's been waiting for you." The boy blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "Waiting for me?" "Yes," she said, her voice full of understanding. "It seems Benny has formed a special bond with you. Even though he's in a great place, with a new family who loves him, he's been looking for you. He doesn't forget those who care for him." The boy swallowed hard, his heart aching at the thought. He had never imagined that Benny, the dog he had tried so hard to save, would feel that way about him. "I never wanted to leave him," the boy murmured, his voice barely audible. "I know," the woman replied softly. "And you didn't leave him. You gave him something that most people would never have a chance at life. But now, he's ready to see you again. He's been asking about you." The boy's chest tightened. He felt a rush of emotions flood over him. Guilt, relief, love. Benny was alive. He had made it. And he wanted to see him again. "What do I do now?" the boy whispered, unsure of what to say or how to process the wave of emotions crashing over him. "You do what feels right," the woman said kindly. "Benny's waiting for you. He's ready to see you again, and I think you're ready too." The boy stood there, staring at the woman, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. It had been so long since he had felt this kind of connection with anyone, let alone an animal. But Benny was different. Benny had changed his life in ways he couldn't even begin to understand. And now Benny was asking for him again. The boy's mind raced. He had always told himself that Benny had been the one to save him, to show him that there was more to life than survival. But in that moment, standing there in the cool autumn air, he realized something. It wasn't just Benny who had been saved, it was him too. "I want to see him," the boy said, his voice steady. "I want to see him." They walked together, the boy and the woman, toward the rescue center. The sky had begun to turn a soft shade of purple as the sun set behind them, casting long shadows over the city streets. The boy's heart pounded in his chest, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was anticipation. When they arrived, Benny was waiting for him, just like the woman had said. He was standing in the yard, his fur shining in the fading light, his eyes locked on the boy. And then, with a joyful bark, Benny ran toward him, his steps sure and strong. The boy dropped to his knees, his hands reaching out for the dog he had thought he had lost forever. Benny leapt into his arms, licking his face with the same excitement the boy had remembered. And for the first time in so long, the boy didn't feel alone. He wasn't just a boy who had once been abandoned. He wasn't just a survivor. He was a man who had found something worth living for. As the boy sat on the ground, holding Benny in his arms, he realized that the road ahead wasn't about the destination. It was about the journey. And in that journey, he and Benny would walk side by side together. There was still so much ahead of them. Challenges, struggles, and more unknowns. But for now, in this moment, everything felt right. The boy had found his place in the world, and Benny had found his family. And together, they would face whatever came next as they had always done. With love, with trust, with each other, the days after Benny's return were a blur of joy and healing. The boy, now a young man, found himself growing stronger, not just physically but emotionally, in ways he never expected. Benny, with his playful energy and unwavering loyalty, was a constant reminder of what they had been through together and what they still had ahead. The boy had often thought of himself as a survivor, someone who had learned to scrape by in a world that felt unforgiving. But Benny had shown him something deeper. The power of connection, the power of being seen. They lived differently now, with more intention, more care. The boy had found a small job at a local cafe, doing the things he had always known how to do. Washing dishes, sweeping the floors, making small talk with customers. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to give them both a roof over their heads, enough to buy food when they needed it. The cafe was a warm, safe place. The boy began to smile again, even laugh sometimes, as he spent his evenings walking back from work with Benny trotting happily beside him. But as much as their life together had shifted, there were still moments of silence that hung in the air. The boy could feel the weight of the past pressing on him, especially as he stared out the window of the small apartment they shared. His thoughts would often drift back to those long months of struggle, when he had been convinced there was no way out. But then Benny would nudge him with his cold nose, snapping him out of his reverie, reminding him that the pain they had endured didn't define them. They were here now, and that was all that mattered. Yet there were still dreams the boy hadn't let go of. Deep down, he knew he wanted more for himself, more than just surviving, more than just getting by. He had always thought of his life as a series of obstacles, but he realized now that it didn't have to be that way. It was time for him to step beyond the limitations he had placed on himself, to reach for something greater. And Benny, he had always been there, a steady force, pushing him forward with nothing but unconditional love. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky and the streetlights flickered on one by one, the boy sat at the kitchen table, a cup of warm tea cradled between his hands. Benny lay at his feet, his head resting on his paws, and the boy looked out the window, the city sprawling before him. It was a peaceful evening, and for the first time in a long while, the boy allowed himself to feel hopeful. That was when he heard a knock at the door. It was a soft knock, one that could have been easily ignored. But the boy's instincts kicked in, and he got up slowly, his heart thudding in his chest as he opened the door. Standing there was a familiar face, one that made his heart flutter. It was the woman from the rescue center. Her name was Clara, and she was standing in front of him with a gentle smile on her face, holding something in her hand. "Hey," she said, her voice warm. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." The boy blinked in surprise but smiled back, his eyes lighting up with recognition. "Clara," he said, his voice soft but steady. "What brings you here?" Clara stepped forward, her smile widening as she looked down at Benny, who had gotten up and padded over to her, tail wagging excitedly. "I came to check on Benny, of course," she said. "But I also wanted to talk to you. I know it's been a while, but I've been thinking about something that could change everything." The boy felt a flicker of curiosity. "What do you mean?" he asked, stepping aside to let her in. Clara entered the small apartment, her presence filling the room with warmth. She looked at Benny, who was happily circling her legs, and then turned her attention back to the boy. "I've been working with some local organizations," she began. and we're starting a program that helps people who've gone through tough times. People who are looking to get back on their feet. It's not just about the animals, though. It's about building a community, offering opportunities to people who need them most. And I think you'd be perfect for it. The boy's breath caught in his throat. Me? He asked, uncertain. But I don't know anything about programs like that. I don't have anything to offer. You have more than you think. Clara said softly, her eyes filled with understanding. You've been through it all, just like so many others who come to us for help. You understand what it means to struggle, to fight. That's the kind of experience that's invaluable. You're a survivor, and now it's time to help others. The boy stood still for a long moment, the weight of her words sinking in. He had always seen himself as a lost cause, someone who had never belonged. But Clara saw something in him that he had never seen in himself. The idea of helping others, of using his own pain to make a difference, was both terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time, he began to imagine a life that didn't revolve around survival. He began to see a future that didn't end with him alone on the streets. I don't know if I'm ready for something like that, he said quietly, his voice unsure. What if I fail? What if I can't do it? Clara smiled, her voice warm with kindness. The only way to fail is to never try. And you've already shown that you have what it takes. Benny wouldn't be here if you didn't have the strength to change. He's proof that you can do hard things. The boy's chest tightened, and his eyes drifted to Benny, who was now sitting at Clara's feet, looking up at her with total trust. He realized in that moment that Benny had never given up on him, even when he had given up on himself. And now Benny had come full circle. And so had he. The boy took a deep breath, the weight of Clara's words echoing in his mind. What do I need to do? Clara's face lit up with a smile that made the boy's heart swell with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. Let's start with you. Let's get you involved. You've already started down this road, just by opening up to Benny. Let's see where it can take you. For the first time in his life, the boy felt like he had a real future ahead of him. Not just a future of surviving, but a future of giving, of creating, of healing. As Benny rested his head on the boy's knee, looking up at him with his soulful eyes, the boy smiled. He wasn't just taking care of Benny anymore. He was taking care of himself too. And for the first time, he believed in the possibility of change. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but now, for the first time, he didn't have to walk it alone. With Benny by his side and the promise of something greater, the boy felt ready to face whatever came next. Because this time it wasn't just about surviving. It was about living fully, with purpose, with love, and with the strength of us both. As the boy sat there, with Benny's head resting on his lap, the weight of the world didn't feel as heavy anymore. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue across the room. But in that quiet moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The future was no longer a distant, uncertain place. It was right here, unfolding before him, and for the first time in years, he felt ready to meet it. He looked down at Benny, who was now asleep, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. The bond they shared, the struggles they had endured together, was something no one could take away. The boy had once believed he was broken, that he had nothing to offer. But Benny had shown him that even the most shattered pieces could form something whole, something beautiful. The boy stood up slowly, lifting Benny in his arms, his body no longer feeling weak under the dog's weight. They had walked the hardest path together, and now they were stepping into something new, something full of promise. He smiled down at Benny, whispering quietly to him, "Why made it, buddy? We made it," as he gazed out the window. The city lights flickering in the distance. He knew one thing for sure: this was just the beginning. Whatever came next, they would face it together side by side. Because now they were no longer just surviving. They were living. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The boy closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. And with a quiet heart, he whispered into the night, "Together, we'll be all right." And in that moment, he knew they were.